Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition in our digital workshop series, Craft and Conversation. My name is Avery Silverberg, and I am the social media manager for the SCBWI, along as an avid YA reader, writer, and bookstagrammer. Our sign language interpreters for today are Jenny Kamen and Ashley Cole. Today, I'm so excited to discuss everything from censorship to the importance of honesty in young adult literature, with none other than the best-selling and award-winning author of 15 young adult novels in verse for teens, Ellen Hopkins. The Q&A is open, so please feel free to ask questions at any time about craft in YA characters, plot, or anything at all, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So Ellen, please come on screen and let's get started.
Oh, here I am.
Here you are. Ellen, thank you so much for being here with us today. First of all, I just have to tell you that last week I went through the entire Crank series and it was just absolutely mind-blowing. Like I could not put it down for the life of me. So I just want to start off this conversation by talking about censorship, a topic that I know you know extremely well, being one of the most banned authors of all time. So my first question for you is, have you ever had the opportunity to talk to someone who made the decision to ban one of your books? And if you did, what did you say? And if you didn't, what would you like to say?
I have talked to parents. Okay, so we have to differentiate right now between what's happening right now and like book challenges past, okay? Because book challenges past, it's usually one parent or, usually a parent that sees their kid reading Crank or whatever. And then they get all upset because they oh, what are you reading it? And why are you doing this? And so then they might present a challenge. And then there's most school districts have a system in play where, they have to go in and read the books and they have to go in and decide, if they really should be banned or banned is, if they should be removed, I guess is a better way of saying it. So usually, and almost always when I've talked to that single parent, what I usually do is I have a file of reader letters, emails, messages that they've sent me about each of the books and why those books have been important to them, how they have changed their life for the better, how they've given them some kind of insight or understanding into a problem like addiction or whatever. And so usually when it's one person doing it challenging like that, then it becomes a conversation and then you can get to them easier. What's happening now is like a whole different animal. Yeah. This is it's a political drive. It's not even about the books, it's about the politics of it. And so now it's a whole, man, I have had some online conversations with some of those people and they're not kind. I'll say they can be very unkind. And it's impossible to use logic or try to bring onto the table, why my books are important to readers if they're just going to stand up there and scream, which is what they're doing at this point. And it's all about scoring political points right now. It's about taking over school boards. And really, if you look at the underlying factor, it's about really challenging public school education. It's about trying to change public schools and create different spaces for all that stuff. I mean, it's a pretty heavy thing that's happening now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Does your experience with censorship throughout the entirety of your career, whether it's challenges on a small scale, large scale, like now, does it ever make you feel pressure to censor yourself? And how do you combat that?
I just was having this conversation yesterday, actually, with the teacher, and never before. I'm writing a YA now, though, and I have to convince myself to keep going sometimes with some of the scenes, and to remember again that my audience is not the book banners. My audience is my audience. It's the kids
Yeah.
out there that are waiting for this book and that expect me to write honestly and in the space where they're living, which is what I've always done. You know, this idea that, you know, teenagers don't have sex. Really? Come on. Teenagers have sex. Teenagers don't use drugs. Teenagers use drugs too. Teenagers don't have thoughts of suicide. Yes, they do. You know, and I have to write, honestly, I have to write in that space, addressing them on their level. I have to write to them on their level, not to, like, I even have been questioning, like, okay, I'm writing a book about a, twins, a boy and a girl twins who are really, really close twins, but they're separate, they're put into foster and the system separates them, okay? And he
Mhm.
ends up in juvenile detention. So I'm writing juvenile detention and then, you know what, I'm sorry, but boys in lockup use the F word. And, you know, it's like, if I didn't use the F word, not just, you know, overboard use it, but use it when it makes sense to use it, no one would believe the character I'm writing. You know,
Totally.
so I just have to write what I feel is true to the character and true to my, again, my readers.
Absolutely. Mhm. Do you have any advice for authors who are possibly feeling discouraged by book banning right now?
Uh, and again, you have to remember the importance of YA and the kids who need it. Kids need um, they need knowledge, and if you can write honestly, give them the knowledge they need. You know, I always say knowledge is a weapon. Ignorance is not a weapon. Ignorance is,
Mhm.
you know, it just opens the door to kids doing things they shouldn't. And so your
Yeah.
job as a YA author is to remember who's out there. And hopefully you guys are like involved with teens because it's really important. I mean, I've got a 13-year-old left at home. So I've been raising teenagers for like a long time. So I'm around teens all the time, you know, go do school visits, you know, go talk to kids. You know, you can't really write where they're living if you don't know where they're living. So I
Yeah.
think that's the most important thing of all, is to go where they are and talk to them and you know, open up dialogues with kids, because there's this kind of idea that some of the people that are supporting the book banning stuff, that if you don't mention sex, kids won't think about sex. And I can tell you for a fact that is not true. And
Yes.
so better that what I always say too is like, okay, and this is a statistic for you, that 92% of high school boys and 62% of high school girls have viewed online porn, okay?
Mm.
So when you go and they're looking at porn, they're getting a real bird's eye view of what's going on. You know what I mean? In a book, at least they have to use their imagination to get to
Yeah.
what's going on, you know? And
Yeah.
and in YA, you're not giving them blow by blow descriptions, you're just mentioning what's happening, you know what I mean?
Totally. And in some ways, that's what's so powerful about reading, is that it does give teens the power to kind of imagine for themselves. And I think maybe that's what scares so many people about reading, but it's powerful in a beautiful way, I think.
Also, they can self-censor, you know what I mean? They can turn it off.
Oh,
Um,
so true. Yeah.
and they can also close the book if it's too much. And kids really are pretty good about self-censoring. I've seen it
Mhm.
in my family. Um, and including from a kid who I have caught viewing online porn as a youngster too, you know, and it
Yeah.
starts pretty young. There's a curiosity, and of course there's a curiosity because it's part of being a human, right? It's part of
Mhm.
human nature, sexuality, gender, all these things that scare people. They're part of who we are. We are born with
Absolutely.
these things, you know, and so to deny that they exist is just, I mean, it's so short-sighted to me. It's like, better to have the conversation, better to read the
Yes,
books with your kids, better to, like, you know, present the books to the kids and talk about it and open up conversation, dialogue.
completely. Okay. So here's an important question that I think we're all so eager to know right now. What can people do, teenagers as well as all of us, do to help support authors of banned books right now?
If you have the drive, show up at the school board meetings. I mean, and champion the books and explain why they're important.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think it's important to support financially, especially the like LGBTQ authors, or authors of color that are being banned just specifically because of who they are, not because even what their books are about. And that to me is like so important. Hopefully provide those books to the kids that need them somehow, whether if they're out of the school libraries, then have a little library, or provide them to your public libraries or whatever. But I think supporting financially authors by buying their books is really important.
Okay, great. That's amazing to know. So your work is so personal and close to home, and especially at the end of reading Crank, we get a really personal author's note, which is so fascinating and beautiful to learn about how the story is close to you. I'm so curious to know about your journey of writing stories that are close to home, and how do you know when to fictionalize and when an idea is too close to home? How do you know when to take a step back, and especially when to choose fiction over maybe choosing memoir?
Right. And I think fictionalizing allows that step back.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you to, if you know something is going to hurt somebody and you're not really wanting to do that, then you can go ahead and create a whole different character that represents the same, thing that happened to you or whatever, but it's a whole different character. So what I would say is, in real life, so in the book Crank, right, there's an older sister who's gay, right, and a younger brother, a little brother. In real life, I have an older son who's gay and a little sister. So I did, pull back a little bit. I didn't want to pull back too far because I thought it was really, really important that people knew that it happened to me and my family, so they would never say this could not happen.
Mm-hmm.
It could never, addiction couldn't happen that fast. Well, it could, because it did, and so that's why the author note, that's why I wanted people to know that,
Mm-hmm.
it represents something that I have experienced through my child. I have fortunately avoided addiction. But her father was an addict and actually died of his addiction not too long ago, a couple years ago. So I think stepping back is when it's going to hurt somebody and you don't want to. And again, you can change that character. You can actually change the outcome. If the outcome isn't what you wanted, was too painful in real life, you can change the outcome. And that's why I think fiction it's in a way a more powerful way of presenting it, because you don't have to remember factually everything that happened. And for me, I wasn't there for a lot of the stuff that happened in Crank.
Right.
I was the mom character, so
Yeah, I was wondering that the entire time. I was thinking how incredible it is that you were able to get into her mindset, and yet you didn't experience it firsthand. How did you really get yourself to empathize with that character?
I mean, honestly, I started the book in prose, and it was my voice in prose, and it was not the right way to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Moved it in verse because verse is a very kind of internal, it's how the poet views the world, right? It's a very internal way of writing. So and it requires fewer descriptions. It requires more powerful words, you know what I mean? And so that's how you think. You don't think, oh, and he's such a beautiful guy with gray speckled eyes. That's not what you do. You go, oh my God, he's foxy. So I think the disparity of language for me was helpful in doing that. As far as knowing what happened, I mean, obviously we observed part of it, but I found, and this is back in the day before cell phones, when this stuff was happening. I mean, people had them, but they weren't prevalent at all. So I didn't find her cell phone, but I found journals when she went to prison. I found letters from the boyfriends, like actual handwritten letters from the boyfriend, because we didn't have texts going on.
Mhm.
Um, she confessed a lot to her sister, and her sister
Mhm.
could never keep anything from me. So,
Yeah.
I learned a lot that way.
Okay.
But and I would say Crank and Glass are about 60% factual and 40% fictionalized. Fallout, so Fallout, for you guys who don't know, so Crank is the first part of her addiction when she was kind of using street meth, right? Glass is when she moved into like using crystal meth, ice, so the heavier part of her addiction. Fallout moves into the points of view of her three oldest children, who lost their mom to drugs. And so those stories are pretty made up, I mean, I knew the kids, and so they're represented, but the stories are very different. So
Okay, so we can move on to talking about some craft questions. We have many YA authors in the audience, published authors and potential aspiring YA authors. So I'd love to pick your brain about all things craft related, starting with your journey to getting published. So can you talk about what that was like for you publishing your first book, Crank, again, and how you found your literary agent and what your drafting process was like way back when?
so actually my way in was so I was raising kids. I had little kids, and I thought I was going to write picture books, which is not my skill set. But I didn't know that then. So my whole journey started with writing. There was a tribute to Dr. Seuss contest, right? So I'm like, I could write a picture book. So I wrote a 2,500 word picture book about about the land beyond reflection, which actually I might go back and revisit it because it was kind of a cool idea. But anyway, so and then when that was like, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I found SCBWI. This is the truth. I found a local chapter of SCBWI here in Northern Nevada, and the regional advisors like, picture books are not 2,500 words. Let's talk about what writing is, okay? And my background was kind of journalistic, so I'm writing newspaper magazine articles. I was freelancing at the time too, and so I moved into children's nonfiction first. So before I published any kind of fiction, I published 20 nonfiction books for mostly middle grade, some YA, science, history, biographies. And that was my way in to being able to like sign a contract and turn a book in, okay? They were much shorter, but and then Crank happened. I mean, the story of Crank happened. And when Christine in the book, Crystal in Real Life, when she went to prison, I knew I had to write this book for teens because I really, really wanted to turn teens off that path if I could. That was my whole focus in writing that book. And so, and how I published the first time was I sat down at a writer's conference with a Simon and Schuster editor. And I showed her a picture book I wrote, and she's like, "This is beautiful writing. But I don't do picture books. What else do you have?" And I had 10 pages of Crank written at that time, and I showed that to her, and she's like, "Send that to me when it's done." Right. So 3 months later, I had 75 pages done, and I emailed her and I said, "There's been a lot of interest in this book." There was, just from my family and my friends, not from many publishers or anything, but would you like an exclusive look? And she said, sure. So I sent her 75 pages. She sent me a contract to finish the book, and that was my way into publishing YA, which I know it doesn't happen like that at all anymore. But it was SCBWI. It was knowing from SCBWI to go to a writer's conference and then and submit manuscript for critique, right? And so all those things that I learned through SCBWI actually did create my career in this space. And so for all you guys that are out there, you know, still thinking, still trying to get published, it can happen and it will happen. You just got to like keep, you know, sometimes you have to refocus actually. So it's not always, like I said, I thought I was going to write picture books and that.
Right.
No. So, and then once I found, you know, once I wrote Crank, I mean, I found just a real respect for the generation I was writing for. I found a real love of YA lit, read a lot of YA lit, and I'm like, this stuff is like great, you know, it's like great, and I can do this. So I didn't get an agent until my fourth book. I got an agent. So I sold the first 3 unagented, which was not actually a good plan because agents, they're there to like, you know, take care of all the stuff that you can't take care of on your own. But at that time I was probably a co-regional advisor. And so I invited this agent to our conference. And in the meantime, I go, so I have these 3 books published, like, what can you do for me? And so she told me what she could do for me. And then that's how I got my agent.
Wow, that is an amazing story. How, so an important thing that I caught from that story is just your confidence to really call yourself a writer, just right from the beginning, to say, you know, I have an exclusive look that so many people are interested. I'm curious, how do you think you really kind of established that confidence right from the get-go?
Well, I've been working at writing for a while. And so, and growing my craft and, you know, taking classes and doing all the things that I thought I needed to do to build a career as a writer. So yeah, and that did build my confidence. Also, I mean, I'm kind of just that kind of person, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think publishing the nonfiction books, that helped me build, you know, self-confidence as well, because I knew I could write a book that was worth publishing and I could turn it in on a deadline. So I knew I could do it, right? Boy, deadlines get harder and harder as you go forward, though. They really do. And so, yeah, I think, and the funny thing is, like, if you see me in public, you think I'm a total extrovert, but like most writers at home, I'm not. I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
social media probably has changed that a little bit too, because, you know, and what I would also say about social media helped me build my career very much so. The only platform out there at the time, though, was MySpace. I mean, you know, there was nothing else was out there, and I could see how musicians could build rapport with their readers through MySpace. And so I started doing that as well. So I opened up my messages and readers would write to me, and I built an audience largely through like this whole new, and it was a new space for me. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. No, that's amazing.
But I did. And so my first like Crank was not an immediate New York Times bestseller. Neither was Burn. Both of them ended up being that after Impulse came out, and Impulse hit the list because MySpace featured it. So like 200 million people sign on their MySpace page, and this red book cover came out with a good book review and back, because MySpace was watching me build this audience. So they decided, somebody there decided they liked my writing, and boom, there it went.
That's amazing. You are the original book talker.
Right.
That is so amazing. So what does a typical day look like for you in your writing career? Can you kind of walk us through your writing routine?
Well, everything has been thrown off by the last few years.
Of course.
But and right now, so like we've been in this house, I've written all these books in this house, and we just listed it for sale. And so like everything is different. Like I'm vacuuming 8 times a day to get up dog hair before we show the house, you know. But a typical writing day for me, on a normal year would be, and I'm up early anyway. I'm kind of light triggered. So if it gets light, my brain starts going, hey, get up and do something. So my day would be get up early while the house is still asleep, answer emails, respond to like social media stuff, um, get the boys, the kids, whoever off to school, and then sit down and write. So it would be writing for, a couple hours, and then I'd go play with the dogs or go garden or whatever, and then come back and write another couple hours. So way back when it was probably 5 hours a day of writing. Everything has been upset, COVID upset everything, because I was overseeing distance learning for 3 kids. I was playing teacher instead of writer.
Mhm.
Then again, like life is just like we lost family members period, and everything kind of got put on hold. But I'm trying to write again.
Mhm.
So my husband's like, "Are you ever gonna get that book finished?" I'm like, "I'm trying, I'm trying." Like the finish line is in sight. It's just I'm limping toward the finish line instead of sprinting. But you know, but the inspiration has kind of returned, and for a while, I would say inspiration was kind of like everything just felt so dreadful,
Yeah.
and there was no travel, there were no conferences, there were no like all that outside stuff is also very it's a powerful motivator,
Yes.
to be out doing book signings or doing workshops in person or whatever. And so and I miss that stuff, and I
Mhm.
know my writer friends did too, and we're all like so excited that it's like picking back up again. It's like, and we don't have to wear masks anymore, but we
Yeah.
probably should anyway. But
Even just to have like the inspiration of like different voices and people around you is so important as an author. Like not having that is not very motivating. So I
yes,
can,
and school visits, I mean, they're so special because
yeah.
you're observing, you're first of all, you're absorbing the energy, you're observing like what's important. Like for me, all that stuff is like, uh, and be a voyeur, okay? I mean, just relentlessly listen to people, like what's pissing them off, like what's making them happy, like why does that person, why are those two kids in love, like what does that look like, to know what it, and sometimes it gets a little but that's okay too, but that stuff, yeah, I miss that a lot, and so I'm really happy that we're starting this all back up again. And now because I'm writing middle grade too, by the way, I've got 2 middle grade books out now, and I'm writing middle grade, so I can do middle schools and not just high schools, which
Yeah.
is fun, to be able to talk to the younger kids who are
Hmm.
just really starting to figure out who they want to be.
Hmm.
That's kind of really exciting.
That's an amazing segue. I would love to ask you about the change from writing YA to middle grade, how that change has been, the difference in writing middle grade voice versus YA voice, and all of that.
The difference really is younger kids, so middle school kids, they tend to have more of a relationship, especially in books with their parental figures, because they're not driving themselves places. They're not like most of them aren't sneaking out yet.
Mm.
It's as there's a different feeling to it, but doesn't mean it has to be Captain Underpants either. Because my 2 middle grades they hit hard subject matter as well. They just do it in a way that's less in your face, I guess, is a way of putting it. But they are important books in the same way that my YA is important. It's just there's no sex, there's no cussing, there's no
Yeah.
the stuff that gets books banned now. That's, and I can't. I'm just kind of like hoping the Moms for Liberty don't know I'm writing middle grade. They're probably trying to
Don't
ban them
tell.
too, even though there's no content in them. Just because, and I'm also I'll throw this out here too. I am currently the second most banned author in this country through this movement, and all 14 of my YA books have been banned, and in some school districts, all of them. right? So when they're doing that, they're not reading 14 books. My name is on the cover, so they're just deciding, boom, if it's an Ellen Hopkins book, it's got to go, right? So that's not fair to me, and it's not fair to my books, and it's not, because in that space, like if you look at the content in Burned, which is, it's about a very religious girl, whose father is abusing her mom or whatever. And then you look at the content in Tricks, which is about teen prostitution. The content is like, it's totally different, and the books, the subjects are different. How the kids are in the books are totally different. So it's, just deciding that to blanket ban Ellen Hopkins is like, it pisses me off.
Of course, I can't imagine what that must feel like.
I mean, and again, they won't even have the conversation. They
Yeah.
just really bad when they come and when they hit your social media, and that's when and sometimes it gets a little scary, because sometimes it gets a little scary.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure you have to take care of yourself on social media and hopefully take some social media breaks as well.
I did. I mean, for a while, I took everything private, and
Mhm.
but then my readers can't come to me, and so which defeats the purpose of
Yes.
social media. So, and then eventually I'm like, okay, fine, I think they're done attacking me for now. So here, I'll open back up, and I can always
Yeah.
close it down if I need to.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, so I'd love to move on to talking about your character drafting tips. I mean, you were talking earlier about really writing from truth, but I would love to talk about how you draft authentic characters and any tips you have for YA authors wanting to draft authentic teen characters specifically.
And that's all my pre-write is
Mhm.
weeks of character development. That's what I do. So let's talk. Okay, let's talk about People Kill People, which is about it addresses gun violence. Right, 5 main characters, all of whom have a reason to pick up a gun. So the point of the book is you don't know who that person is until the end of the book, right? So I had to build those characters very carefully. I had to know one of them, like, he's all into kind of white supremacy, and so I had to build him carefully. So I had to research the part of Arizona where they live, and where the white supremacists recruit people from. And so that's all, that research is available, but it's time consuming. And then I
Mhm.
have to put that into like who he is, because that stuff's not what's important. How he processes that, and and decides that he's going to embrace that. That's what makes him that character, right? And so that character building was difficult for to do there, because it's painful to do that research, and
Yeah.
then the idea of one who's considering suicide, right? Because suicide by gun it's a big problem in this country. So what would put her in a space where she would have a gun, and she would be so far at the end of her rope that she would consider it, right? So then I have to build her story, and then they all connect through a character who's not even a POV character. So that's how they all kind of end up connecting, is through this one
Mhm.
character in the middle. So I take and I put Grace in the middle, and I make these hubs, right? And I create the character that way. So there's this character, and then I create her story around her, and then I create this character story around her and him. And so that's kind of, and I know a lot about these kids. I know who their parents are, and what their relationships are with their parents. Like, do they have boyfriends and girlfriends? Do they have girlfriends and girlfriends? So I
Mhm.
just have to create characters that speak to the subject you're writing about. And that for me is actually the fun part. What I really hate is starting a book.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you say your characters come first or does your idea come first?
um, the characters come first.
Mm.
I had a whole different ending in mind for People Kill People, but through writing the characters, that's where that ending came from. And so their story, they start talking to me and telling me their stories as well. And so I never, I'm not an outliner.
Okay.
So this is how I outline. Like I'm writing along, right? And I'm like, okay, I need to remember this by this part of the book, and I just stick it up here, right? These are
Uh-huh.
they're just like notes, and sticky notes are my thing because I
Okay.
don't. I should probably outline. My writing it would probably be a lot easier if I knew what the heck I was doing when I got going. But that's also why, again, I don't a lot of writers love to write the beginning of their books and then they get bogged down in the middle. For me, I hate writing the openings because they have to be right. And also part of my process, because I write in verse, editing verse on the far end, if you have to put a poem in between two poems or a couple poems in, then it changes the way those poems work. Because for those of you that don't know, I mean, it's like the title of a poem is like the next line from the page before in the way I write it. So there's a flow to that. And if my editor comes back and goes, I really need to know more about this right here, I'll be like, really? So I'm I'm a cautious writer in that I'm pretty careful about, I don't write dirty drafts. Like I am very cautious about editing as I go, knowing how the flow works. And if I think there's going to be a problem, sometimes I'll actually go to my editor ahead of time rather than have her come back on the far end. And I'll go, what do you think about that? And she'll usually go, yeah, that's a good idea. But sometimes she'll go, I don't know, maybe not. But it's helpful to have a trusting relationship with an editor and not just be doing. And I guess it could work the same with a really good critique group. If you're part of a really good critique group, if you have beta readers that you really trust, to, as you go along, ask the questions instead of waiting to the end. So I do one draft. I do a read through at the end for like glaring errors or whatever, and off it goes.
Wow. Impressive.
Sometimes not so much.
And how did you start writing novels in verse? How did that format come to you?
I was writing poetry anyway. I mean, I've written poetry pretty much my whole life. And at that point in time, I was a member of a poetry group in Carson City. We met every week. We would critique poetry. So it was a way I was thinking about life already poetically. And like I said, I started cranking prose and it just didn't work. It was like, the voice was angry and it was not a young voice. It was just the wrong voice. So, and then I did a workshop with Sonia Sones, an SCBWI workshop, and her book Stop Pretending had just come out. So she was, Stop Pretending in verse is about her sister's descent into schizophrenia, right? So I'm like, oh, here, personal story, super personal story. The verse really works. I'm gonna try it and I'm gonna change, because Sonia tends to write more in kind of more just regular basic stanzas. So I'm like, I'm going to change it up and write concrete poetry, yay, because I really need more of a challenge than just writing it in verse,
Yeah.
But for Crank especially, to write, so to write in verse, I was able to, like when she's using, I could scatter her thoughts down the page. I could make the words come like she's scattered, and then when she kind of comes back together, the poems come back together into more formal stanzas, and so I could really play with form, and that was a huge challenge, but it was also, it was creative, it was fun to create all that stuff. Now I don't spend quite as much time with form, mostly because the books they're denser, the stories are a little bit more crafted, I guess, because Crank was stream of consciousness a lot of times, I think.
Yeah. So when you are playing with form though, would you write the poem first and then go back and play with form? Like how did you make that work?
No, I mean, and it got where instinctively I would just know. Um,
Um,
so, and I didn't. And again, it's like I can't like go write 20 pages and then go back and change it, like change
mhm.
or whatever. So it was kind of instinctive, I think, knowing what poems made sense to like some of my poems, I pull words out to the side, right? So if there's a poem within the poem.
Mhm.
If you look, it's like the heart of the big poem is over in the, we call them gutter poems because it's in the gutter, the book gutter, but not because the writing's in the gutter. But so yeah, and then it got to be, then I'm going after a while, like, why am I doing that? Oh yeah, because it's fun. It's fun. But no, yeah, I didn't, and I do all that uh, myself in Word. So, I mean, the design department would clean it up. Like, this is what I think it's supposed to look like, and if it wasn't quite close enough, design could figure that out. But
Definitely. Okay, so for the last part of this session, we're going to answer some audience questions. We have so many amazing questions. Starting with, how do you decide how much specificity of things today? Oh, that might be a typo. Um, music, of things today, music, social media platforms to include in what you're writing now. I see what they mean. Okay, so how do you decide how many like current things to include in your writing
so, I
today?
mean, I actually try to avoid that pretty much, unless because I don't want to date the books, you know what I mean? And you're still going to end up doing that anyway. Social media, that's a hard one because it changes all the time. You know what I
Right.
mean? So like you're gonna date your book. If you're using TikTok, we already know when it is, right? It's
Yep.
not gonna be historical fiction, that's for sure.
Yep.
Um, as for music, for me, like okay, Caleb's 13, Clyde. So these are the kids that we've been raising. He just turned 18. So I'm listening to what they listen to. So I kind of have an idea. Caleb though, Caleb 13, he wants to rap all the time. Like he never shuts up. He's like, I'm like, Caleb. No, but I listen to them. And again, I'm cautious still. Like in my first few books, there were no cell phones because the kids didn't have them. So like as we've kind of updating, Crank is currently in production right now as a movie. So updating it, Christina has a cell phone, so we have to update. But I just be really cautious with that stuff.
Mhm.
Try not to make, because kids can go back and read. Crank published October of 2004. Kids can still go back to Crank and relate to the character and what's happening in her life without being pulled out of the story because
Absolutely. Mhm. How do you stay up on the topics and lingo of the current YA audience? A little similar.
right. So that's the same thing. Again, being around them, like, so I'm at their, Caleb's in Little League, so, we're doing sports. And so I listen,
Mhm.
it's just observing and listening. And if you don't have kids in your house, again, find a way to like, connect with kids somehow,
Yeah.
whether it's like going in and substitute teaching or just going in and spending some time in class. Because I always ask, like, people are like, yo, well, how come it's got the alpha? I'm like, have you ever been in a high school? I mean, or even a middle school? Because I mean, seriously, have you ever ridden a school bus? Because that's scary stuff right
Yep.
there. But
Absolutely.
school buses are like really cool. And
Mhm.
this is kind of a cool anecdote. We were in Austria and we had to take a bus from like where we were staying to like dinner, right? And it just happened to be the time of day when the kids got on the bus after school. And the kids, they were speaking German, but they look just like kids here. You know what I mean? They were like, they're bugging each other and they're on their phones and and they look just like kids here. And buses are like just a cool spot because usually their self-defense levels are lowered because they're messing around.
Yeah. The pandemic has been tough in so many ways. How do you recharge your writing battery in trying times?
And again, it's been tough. I mean,
So
seriously,
tough.
I go out with the dogs. I step away from the computer because I do everything on the computer because I have to format and whatever. I think it's really important to step away from the computer. Once in a while, I don't write by hand very often, but once in a while I will, just to remember what it's like to do that. There's a different kind of connection, brain to pencil, than there is brain to computer. So I think it's important to change things up for yourself. I go out, I've created, a garden space that I really like to sit outside in, and I can write outside. I have my little finches that come to the bird feeders, and they're singing to me, and it gets a different kind of atmosphere than it does sitting here in my office. So I think change of scenery is like a really good thing when you need to recharge. I can go like drive up to Lake Tahoe from here. It's a half hour, and sit on the beach or whatever, So find a space. Like I know a lot of people go to Starbucks. For me, it's like all that noise. There's no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need quiet time. And I don't like, the only time I listen to music when I'm writing is if a character that I'm writing has a playlist that matters to them.
Oh, yeah. No, that's definitely a good tip. I like to take walks and listen to character playlists. That's one of my things. Okay. What about the publishing journey has most surprised you or disappointed you? Something that has been just surprising along the way?
I think like we go through these phases of, I don't know. We go through these phases of like the Me Too phase, you know what I mean? Where people that I was close to, like people that I knew well, that were pushed out because of behaviors and stuff like that. So things that I didn't see about people that I thought I knew. Like when you go and you do book stuff, you do festivals, you spend a lot of time with some people, you know what I mean? You do workshops and you think you know somebody. And so I think there's some of that I was surprised by.
Yeah, completely.
Ego. I think ego is the word I'm looking for. Because I don't, looking back, I actually do think that I had an ego for a while. It has disappeared, just so you know. But I think egos, and they can be difficult to deal with. So just remember that people are human and they're not all good or bad.
Yeah, that's important. Okay. How young of a character would you address this content of sex addiction, suicide, etc.? How do you decide how graphic to make these scenes?
It depends on the subject again. So like when I'm doing teen prostitution, right? So Tricks is about kids who end up on the streets in Las Vegas turning tricks. There's zero way to write that story without it's graphic. It's not, again, I'm not like showing you what it looks like exactly. I'm telling you what got them into that space. The things that they did, the choices they made that pushed them into that space, and then the outcomes of those, which is not always a good outcome, right? There's no way you cannot have sex, you cannot have drugs in that situation because it's about prostitution, trafficking. It's subject matter. It's how old. I trust my readers again. So I trust my readers, and I see kids that are younger. And the funny thing is, like, I've seen kids at 10 years old that needed read Crank because they didn't understand why their mom left them, right? So I actually handed the book to my 10-year-old because he needed to understand why his mom left him, right? So there are kids who are prostituted by their parents at 10, 11, 12 years old. I hear from them. This is not something I'm just making up.
Yeah.
So you just have to, it's just how you present it, but you can't shy away from the subject matter if you're writing about the subject matter,
Yep.
So it's just, again, it's writing honestly, it's writing, and you have to, that research really needs to, like I spent time working with Las Vegas Vice when I wrote Tricks, right? There were girls on the street out in front of those casinos turning tricks. So I talked to them,
Mm-hmm.
Primary research is really, really important. And once you develop a readership, you'd be surprised at the things that people, your readers will tell you. They share some.
So do you develop, do readers' stories help you develop other stories?
They do. I mean, or if I need information, like in Perfect, I have a beauty pageant girl, right? And I've not been involved in that situation, but I threw it out to my social media. So pageant moms, pageant girls, pageant siblings, and the siblings, those stories are really interesting because, the jealousy factor or the pride factor or whatever, those things, again, all that stuff feeds into creating those characters.
Yeah.
So creating that girl, I had all this wonderful, input from people, and the same as like I'm writing juvenile detention. I've done juvenile detention visits, but I wanted to know what it was like to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I threw it out to social media, and I had young girls and men, coming to tell me what it's like when you're in juvenile detention,
Yeah. Okay, we have time for a few more. Do you have any advice for writers on particularly submission, particularly with verse manuscripts? My agent has said there are fewer editors open to verse novels, and so they're often harder sells.
I think that was probably accurate 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's accurate now. I mean, there are a lot of verse novels coming out. Editors are, and for early on, I think it was hard for editors to get to it if they didn't know verse or poetry, or especially if they didn't like it. And so I think it used to be, well, I already have a verse novelist. And now, I mean, look at all the wonderful verse novels out there, there are all kinds of diverse voices in it. I think there's plenty of room for verse novels as long as the story is powerful.
Yeah. How do you balance editorial feedback with your own authorial vision? Do you ever end up disagreeing with your editor over certain edits? It's a great question.
Yes. I do. And I was fortunate in having the same editor for a number of years, and she and I just had a great relationship. So I just pick up the phone and call, or whatever. We talk that way. Then she got lost in a house cleaning at that publisher, and then it became harder because the editor they put me with, she and I didn't connect that well. We did 2 books together, and then a third one, which that's a whole other story. But it's hard when you don't connect with your editor. And then now I've got this great. She's at a whole different publisher. It's like a whole different house. There's a whole different publicity department, marketing, school and library. It's all different, so it's all exciting again. You know what I mean? It's not like we don't, and we're still learning about each other, and there's kind of a good part about that. But she just happens to be very, very open to exchanges of ideas, and so I can't really even stress how important that relationship is, because you'll get frustrated and they'll get frustrated. And that's why you need an agent that will know the right person to put you with. But I did the 2 middle grade with my new, and I'm doing this YA with my new one. So we haven't worked on YA yet together. So that's going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance dialogue and description in your work?
So with verse, it's harder because, you know, you have to have dialogue in there, right? But you also you have to figure out how to format the dialogue so you know how it looks back and forth. Like I saw a review of one of my books the other day, and she had never read anything in verse, so she didn't realize the way that I write. You know, I usually have the main character in quotation marks on this side, right? And then I use the italics over here with the person they're talking to. So you know the back and forth that way. And that's just my style, I guess. But dialogue is important. But in verse too, you don't want to lose the beauty of the language. And that's the tricky part with writing dialogue when you're writing a verse novel. So go ahead and do the dialogue, and then I usually pull back and do a kind of more reflective poem that can use prettier language than the kind of language that you use when you talk to somebody. So it is a balancing act, and different writers do it different ways. It's just a matter of reading a lot and then deciding, you know, your style. And every novelist needs to have their own style, whether you're writing verse or prose. Yeah, you know, you can still you can take poetry, the poetic devices that make, you know, verse so beautiful, use those in your prose. I mean, I recommend to people all the time to consider your word choices and to consider flow, like, you know, when a scene's moving quickly, shorter sentences, right? If it's a more reflexive place, you know, they're sitting there considering, then you can use longer sentences and think about pacing through your sentence length or the words you use or whatever.
Absolutely. And two more questions. So one of them is more like a fun one. What are you reading right now? And do you have any book recommendations?
I am not reading right now.
No worries.
I don't, when I'm writing, I try not to read. At least I don't read.
Okay.
Like if I'm writing away, I don't usually read away.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I just try to avoid any kind of, you know, thought of like borrowing something I shouldn't.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. Okay. And then lastly, how do you take care of yourself with all the work that you do, all the writing you do? What is your self-care routine?
I wish I had one.
Maybe advice for other writers hoping to manage their own mental health.
Right. No, I do try to take weekends and again take, you know, go camping or do something that's just like totally outside of, you know, what I have to face every single day. And you know, I've got kids stuff going on. We're selling the house. I got that going on. I got dogs.
Dogs are mental health saviors, so
they're very they're challenging though, because one's a pup, because she's a year and a half. She's like, and one's like, seriously.
Puppies are babies, so.
But also, you know, it's just this time of year. It's spring. It's gardening. There's just all this stuff. And so sometimes I just have to remind myself that the writing is still important, you know, and I have to come back to that again more than I have for the last 2 years, because I love what I do. I just have to remember, like once I do see the finish line on this book, which is overdue. But the finish line is right there. It's just, again, I'm limping toward it instead of sprinting toward it. And so once this book is done, I'm going to change it up. I want to go do another middle grade with a girl protagonist that deals with adoption, because I'm adopted and I've adopted a couple of kids. And then I want to do an adult historical fiction that kind of like ties into some of my mom's life. So it was kind of an interesting, she was young during the Depression. And so I really want to do that.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited for your future books. And Ellen, thank you so much for this workshop and for all this incredible information and inspiration. I know I am so excited to write after this, as I'm sure everyone else is too. A recording of this workshop will be available in the digital archive 24 hours after this workshop. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I gotta go back.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.